Good afternoon, everyone. We will call the Coronavirus Ad Hoc Committee meeting to order for April the 5th, 2003. Ms. Carrillo, if you will, please call the roll.
Brenham.
Here.
Barron.
Here.
Newton.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. I'd also like to recognize Mr. Livingston, who is here in the chambers with us, and to apologize just for being slightly a little behind schedule today. Our next order of business is the approval of the minutes from our meeting on February the 14th, 2023. We can find those items in our packet on pages 5 through 8. Do we have any modifications that need to take place of our minutes? If not, I'll accept a motion.
So moved. Motion to approve.
I'll second it.
Further discussion? Okay. Ms. Carrillo, please call for the vote.
Brenham.
Yes.
Barron.
Yes.
Newton. Motion approved.
Our next order of business is the adoption of the agenda. Mr. Brown or Ms. Carrillo, do we have any changes to the agenda?
No request for changes.
No, ma'am.
I'll entertain a motion to accept the agenda as written.
Okay.
Ms. Carrillo?
Brenham.
Yes.
Barron.
Yes.
Newton. Motion approved.
Our next order of business is a discussion / action for the American Rescue Plan applications. We have spent a lot of time with the applications. By now, council members have had an opportunity to review the applicants and their applications in detail. And so it's my goal today that we will take each category. They're not going to be in order. We're not going to take them in order, but what we will do is just take them with some of the ones that have presented some more conversation than others, and then also looking at some additional ones. I understand that we have a list and a lot of things that we need to address in here. And I am fine with moving one or two of the groups out of committee and making a recommendation to full council, and then this committee reconvening and continuing the work. But what I would like for us to do is I want us to be able to move something out of this committee today. We've been around this mountain a long time, and it's been a big task, one of which we didn't know it was going to be so big, but we're here now. And the citizens of Richland County have been waiting for these dollars. They need these dollars. And not to say that the process needs to speed up because they're in need, but the process, what I want us to do is just to note that we continue to stay true to what we said, the integrity of the process, making sure that we are good stewards of the funds that have been given to us by the federal government. So at this time, before we begin our conversation, I would like to turn it over to Mr. Brown or administration for any opening comments or remarks or anything that we should be mindful of as we engage in the next few moments.
Thank you, Ms. Barron, because I want to make sure I give the committee all the time that you need to consider these items. We are at the stage where it is in the committee's hands to utilize the information provided through the process that went through a third-party process for review. And what you have before you, again, are the applications and the information that was ultimately vetted. And now we're asking for you all to consider what particular programs you want to provide funding for. And we'll certainly take that information and move forward with the process as dictated by this committee and ultimately by county council.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. And so we've definitely had some conversation over the last couple of days, and then we did receive a detailed email from ACA Thomas. And so with that, I want to start the discussion at broadband, and that would be starting on page 229 in our binder. And I want to open up the discussion based upon where we left in our work session. There was lots of conversation about the state. The state has provided an absorbent amount of money to go into broadband. And if what we are doing at this point is providing duplication of services or duplication of funds for the same services. So I would open up the floor for some discussion at this time. Ms. Newton, you're recognized.
I appreciate being recognized before I raised my hand. I was getting there. So, Ms. Barron, I would like to echo what you said, that since we originally accepted these applications, there has been a significant amount of investment in broadband, and those dollars are continuing to roll in. Among those dollars is a household by household credit for internet services that's going to be available to everyone. I know that information was pushed out by my school district and probably others. I did have a conversation with the state director of broadband, Jim Stritzinger, and wanted to just kind of talk about the dollars that were available and where he thought we might be able to make the biggest impact. And so I will paraphrase our conversation for what it's worth for the body. And so specifically, one of the things that he mentioned, giving again the great influx of dollars, many of them from his office, was that we would be better served if we looked at organizations that he called community anchors. So institutions like libraries, perhaps institutions like schools, where they already played a big role in the community, providing broadband services. They might be meeting places, they might be trusted sources that were providing internet. And then additionally, for many of those community anchors, you had the added benefit of serving a broader geographic area across the county with many of those. So that was the suggestion that he made. And so for me, just to continue based on that, looking at the programs here, I would look at recommending the Richland Library Program, which gives us geographic diversity across the county. It has a track record of lending things to people. And when I say things, I mean things, not just books. They have the library of things where everything from equipment to electronics are given out on a regular basis. And then I have some questions about the Columbia International University one. I would look at that also as a community anchor. Obviously, it serves a smaller geographic area, but it does seem to fall into that community anchor category. So those are my thoughts on this category.
Thank you, Ms. Newton. Definitely want to open it up. Mr. Brandon, did you have anything to offer?
I really appreciate that Ms. Newton did that legwork and that information on its face. I also felt like the library program was likely a strong candidate for funds in this particular category. I'm looking at the Recreation Commission's program, and it seems like there's quality objectives there, but it also appears that this would be a new type of program. Did anybody else get that same sense from reviewing the application? Would this be an expansion of services they provide to the community?
It appeared to be a new program versus an expansion.
I don't have anything else.
Thank you. Mr. Livingston?
I kind of looked at it from two perspectives. One of them is when I started looking at the state and federal funding and so forth, those funds seem to be more toward broadband infrastructure. And going back to the point Mr. Newton is making, I think we probably need to look at more of those who are geared toward a service in terms of broadband access and those kind of things, as opposed to infrastructure. It's the only observation I have.
Thank you. And so I would like to offer my comments on this area, and they're very similar to Ms. Newton's. And that is, I would like to see more of providing some, I guess, additional hotspots, or as Ms. Newton has phrased it, anchors. The applicants here that we have recommended, just at a glance and a high level research, a couple of them have already received some funds, to my knowledge, and so I'm just very leery about supplanting at this point. And so with that, I too would like to recommend, that we take a closer look at a couple of these here. And I will, even as we move forward, I want us to note that when we're having this discussion, we can do just like we do during budget cycle. We can make motions for 1, 2, or do a blanket for the whole category. I also want to say, before I open up for any motions, to note that I want staff to be fully aware that it is our goal as a committee that when we make this recommendation, that we also look at, when we do a desk review, that all unallowable costs are backed out. Of course, I just want to go on the record to say that, so that people understand that just because you see, $800,000 does not mean that you're going to get that amount, because of course it would be dependent upon if it's qualified. You're recognized.
Thank you. I do have a question about the desk review process, if it would be appropriate to ask it here.
Sure.
So first, before I ask my question, for my benefit and others, would someone please explain how you envision the desk review process working, and then I'll ask my question.
Madam Chair, if I may.
May be recognized.
Thank you. Councilman Newton, the way that we've spoken with this with our vendor is that they would actually take these applicants that are recommended to be moved forward, and they will sit down with the applicant to further understand their budget and the actual use of funds, to be able to determine which funds are actually applicable and which may be questionable or redlined and that may not apply to the program.
And when you say move forward, are you envisioning that this desk review happens between the committee and full council, or after full council?
I would imagine that would happen. Well, that is a very good question.
Yeah, and that's really the heart of what I'm wondering. And I'll tell you why. I can see the logic in doing it either way. I feel that there's some additional information, even for things that we recommend, that could be helpful for the full body, but I don't want us to violate any best practice or be unnecessarily duplicative, but that is the crux of my question.
If it pleases the committee, I'd like to ask Sarah Harris, since she has lived in the consulting world before, at how they typically would do that.
There we go. Hi. Okay. Well, thank you. So typically what we would do is, right at this point, we have a pretty good idea of which applicants would be awarded. So we would take that information, and we could do it, actually, both scenarios are plausible. So taking that information, we look in the background, we could get some of that additional preliminary information that's needed. So if you're going through your review and you have questions about that, we could provide that to those applicants at that time to vet some of those processes as well.
So it sounds like it's open either way. Before I follow up, I'm looking at you, Mr. Brown. You have such a lovely smile. Was there something you wanted to add here?
I don't want to complicate it. I'm just thinking, we had a conversation about tolerance levels. And so the committee if the committee is going to vet the potential recipients all the way down and then come out of that and say to the council, we've done all these steps and now we recommend it. I was just wondering if council had a different view, right? I mean, I guess they could always change it and say we want, so that's what I'm trying to get at is to make sure how we effectively allow the committee to make its recommendations, but not step on the toes of the full council if full council felt differently about how the review went and the elements of it. So not trying to complicate it. That's
No, sure. And I don't want to complicate it either. And I guess for me, nor am I saying that things would have to happen to the nth degree, but the more that I've looked, the more that I found additional questions that I have. And it's not just about eligible expenses, it's about other things. And so I guess I'll wait till we get to the end of this process because this is a body that does desire information. And so I'm just thinking, if we take it to council with our recommendations, is it then going to pause there for some information that could have been found out before? But I have learned that you cannot anticipate everyone's questions. And so maybe I need to put that aside. So for right now, I consider my desk review question to be answered. And I thank you for being recognized.
So I think that it's to our advantage for us to make a decision as this committee, what we're recommending. If there is some details in the budgets of these items or these organizations that give us some heartache or some heartburn, let's make those recommendations here in this committee and then equip the staff with our full recommendation for them to go do their desk review and then bring back the information as a part of our report to full council. That's how I envision this process to go. Does that work for everyone? So at this point, I think if there isn't any more discussion, I would like to move forward with a motion if there is one for this for broadband services.
Madam Chair.
You're recognized, Ms. Newton.
I move that we forward to council recommendations to approve funding for Columbia International University and Richland Library.
There a second? I will second it. Discussion. Having none? Ms. Carrillo.
Brenham,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Thank you. One's going out. Progress is well on the way. Okay, the next topic I want us to discuss is affordable housing, which is found on page 553. I think it starts at 553. This is also one of those areas where there was some conversation about what the expectation was from committee and from council and what we actually received. I want to share a conversation that I did have with ACA Thomas, and that is that with these projects, a lot with the housing projects, we're looking at applicants who are requesting funds to build or to purchase land and to build all within the time period that's set forth by guidance. It is a concern now that I've sat with the applications a little bit further to note that I'm not certain that any of these projects can get off the ground and implemented and have all the steps completed within our time period. And so I want to start there with that conversation because we had applicants who were marked as more of at a higher risk for the county because their projects were not going to be completed in the time period. And when we look at the applications that we have set forth and the ones that perhaps might have been eliminated, I think they're all sitting in the same category. That's my opinion. I want us to be able to, as a council, be able to support funding affordable housing, workforce housing. But when we look at this pot of money, we do have restraints on how we need to move forward when we're awarding these dollars. So I don't want us to award dollars that we know are not going to be able to meet the deadline that's set forth. So I started the conversation there, and we'll open it up for further discussion.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Branham.
So and on this note, I think it was the consultant at the last meeting who kind of expressed the same thing, that there were very much additional restrictions related to spending of these funds to purchase property. Is that accurate? Does anyone remember, or administration?
Acquisition of land to be able to purchase it.
Right.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Recognize.
Yes, there is a concern with acquiring property and the transfer of that property, and being certain that in the transfer of that property to another individual, you go from subrecipient to beneficiary, and who determines the beneficiary. With these funds, there would be quite a few guidelines that the federal government would impose on those. So yes, sir, you do recall that correctly. That is an additional concern that they had, and the other that Ms. Barron pointed out is one of the reasons that some of the other applications just did not meet the risk threshold, because we would be at risk of not completing the projects and potentially putting loss of funds at risk.
Okay. Just one additional comment. From what I see on the notes on these grants on the screen right now, none of them list acquisition of property as part of the proposal. Am I reading that right? So do we not have that concern as it relates to the applications in front of us?
Madam Chair.
Recognize.
Mr. Branham, that's correct. None of these were applicants that actually proposed some sort of service with existing. I think the comments, as I recall from the last committee meeting, from many council members, or from the last work session rather, were that the concern was it was not adding additional units.
Ms. Newton.
Mr. Branham, I just want to make sure, were your questions addressed?
Yes.
Okay. Then, speaking as one of the council members who was concerned that there weren't additional units, here are my feelings. As every member of Richland County Council, I want to make sure that we are adhering very carefully to the federal guidelines, and that we're only doing things for which we're going to be reimbursed. For me personally, my desire and my thought when we approve these dollars is that we would increase the number of units. Now, not by a ton, unfortunately, because $4 million does not get you what it used to. And that's just the sad fact of the market. But what I would love to see is us increase the number of available units. And so with that in mind, at our last, I guess it was the work, I don't know when it was, there was a time when Mr. Brown mentioned that there might be alternate structures that we could look at to achieve our goals. For example, do we say we will allocate funds from the general fund in this amount to where we have greater control and can influence affordable housing units, and then look at doing something that is clearly within the ARPA guidelines with the ARPA dollars? You know, they cancel each other out. Please feel free to correct me if I'm using any language that's inappropriate here. And so for me, as it relates to affordable housing, that's what I would like to explore. And so I don't know that it's been thought through enough where we can say to the administrator, go forth and do this thing, but maybe it's a motion where we we request a proposal on how we could achieve that. So I think that the applicants that we have before us as it relates to affordable housing, I think that all of these things are laudable and worthy of funding. And I think for me, wanting to see additional units and new units, I would like for us to find a mechanism where we can make that happen. So I personally would not recommend funding any of these projects, but would recommend investigating some alternate way where we can put the same number of dollars into increasing the number of units. And as part of that, I will also just note that when it comes to some of these services, Richland County has expended millions and millions of dollars already when it comes to, rental assistance and utility assistance. These are areas that we've already addressed, but we have not addressed, at least in my time on council, increasing the number of units. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Newton. Mr. Livingston, you're recognized.
Try not to be redundant since my concerns are along the same line. What I had hoped when we started talking about the affordable housing portion of this was that we could figure out some kind of way to use these funds to develop, some kind of housing trust fund and be able to leverage these funds with private funds and grants and things of that nature to get a continuous program. Now, obviously, it seems like we can't do that, but if there's any kind of creative way where we can utilize this these funds or this process to engage and start some kind of housing trust fund or something of that nature so we can do what I'm talking about doing, it would certainly be great.
Thank you, Mr. Livingston. And so if there aren't any other comments, I would, and I give my thoughts as well, and I don't want to beat a dead horse, but it's about increasing the number of available houses for the workforce market. That was the ultimate goal here. And, I'll be glad to say it on record. A lot of it has come through conversations from community groups, advocates such as More Justice, other organizations that have been here in chambers, and we've met with them. And so I do want us to go on the record to say that this council finds it very important, and that's why we allotted this $4 million. And for us to be true to the process or true to what our intent was, I too would like for us to see if we can, Mr. Brown, come up with some creative way to do what it is that we set out to do, whether it is, if it is the desire of council to create a housing trust or to help fund one, whatever that is within the guidance of our budget, and to be able to do so. So that's what I envision when we said this pot of money is the largest pot of money that we set aside. It was $4 million. All the rest of them were $1 million, $2 million. This was our biggest investment, and we've got to get it right. I think that we have to get this category right. So Mr. Brown, I'm going to turn it over to you and see if there's something that you can help us process through.
Yes, ma'am. What I would simply say then, if the committee's desire is to do that, then the same process, I would say that I would articulate what you just said so it can be captured as a part of your motion, but then whoever, if they're interested to make the motion to approve or direct the county administrator to provide a mechanism or a process that would allow, if you want to be specific, the $4 million allocated for affordable housing to be through ARPA funds to be dollar for dollar, exchanged where possible with general fund dollars for the development of, if exactly you want to do a housing trust fund, for the development of a housing trust fund. So the idea specifically is, so I want to be clear, that whatever funds that you want to utilize to potentially pursue the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, that if you're going to exchange general fund dollars, that's exactly what it is. So that we would utilize the funds afforded through these ARPA dollars in other areas, and we'll use general fund dollars that give you the flexibility to do what you want to do with affordable housing to add units. I just want to make sure that we don't think that it would be these dollars plus general fund dollars, because budgetarily, that would not be something that we could sustain. So it's a lot of wording. We can take time to figure out how you want to word it, but it'll be a dollar for dollar exchange so that the county's budget can be made whole and that we won't have to cut services or not otherwise provide operational dollars where needed to fund the county's needs. I apologize if that was too wordy.
Processing all together. So,
Madam Chair.
Mr. Branham wanted to have a point, then I will come to you, Ms. Newton.
Mr. Brown, I went to law school, so I love wordy. I love wordy answers. I along the lines of what you're helping us craft now with the wording, I wondered if we could somewhat simply identify funds that had already been appropriated for something that would qualify for ARPA money and be able to switch that out in a targeted way so that the $4 million isn't floating there open-ended, but with the handcuffs of, it's got to be spent within an ARPA timeframe and on an ARPA qualifying purpose. For example, the detention center or something like that.
Yes.
So that without getting ready to get attorney advice and other advice. Madam Chair, may I have a moment to reach back and consult with the Assistant County Administrator and County Attorney? Thank you.
And Madam Chair, while he does that, my question was going to be to Attorney Wright, so I feel like I've been recognized already.
I can repeat this, Madam Chair, when the additional members of the committee come back. But what I was want to make sure we provide clarity on. So let me answer your question directly, Councilmember Branham, and address the committee while I do it. I'll follow your logic, but what our anticipation is, we have a portion of, because of what the county received and our budget, we have a portion of American Rescue Plan Act dollars that fall under the lost revenue column. The lost revenue column allows for things that, to your point, that are under the umbrella to be used, but they don't have a very specific specified use like you're describing. And we want to make sure that the funds that we do use in the lost revenue column, that that we choose a project or projects that are applicable. So to your point, we do want it to remain general because the lost revenue column is general and it allows for more flexibility for the county so that we have more access to do that. But the sources that we use it for will definitely be items that the county has identified as priorities. So to your point, yes, but we don't want to narrowly tailor it too much so that then you reduce the ability to actually meet the threshold for all that 4 million. So we do want to leave it general enough under lost revenue, Mr. Branham and members of the committee.
Thank you. And I do want to express that I fully support maximizing the value of this $4 million for the stated purpose of expanding available affordable housing units. I just wanted to ensure that we were not consequently expanding, the budget, or creating a need to now spend $4 million in a different way than we would have otherwise, but for kind of the reassigning of these dollars for this purpose.
Understood. And we're on the same page, and only the items that are identifiable already by the council, which we hear what you're saying, and we'll let you know at that time. But no, sir, we won't be creating any additional uses that would not otherwise already be considered in the recommended budget for the purposes of the general fund dollar and American Rescue Plan Act dollar exchange.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I recognize Ms. Terratio and welcome.
Thank you so much, and sorry to be late. I had a work call. I guess what I would say, thank you, Mr. Brown, for working so diligently on this and for presenting some, a path forward for a mechanism. I would just say that while we have talked and been talked to at length about a trust fund, I'm not necessarily sure that I would want to limit in this motion just the trust fund, but rather be able to explore any, the mechanisms that would best suit the county. So while that might include trust fund monies, it might also include other actions.
Thank you, Ms. Terratio, for that. Ms. Newton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I will echo that for a few reasons. One, because I think it's sound, but also because I think that there's been a lot of confusion about the way trust funds actually work. And so that might not actually be the vehicle that achieves our goal here. But second, I just want to ensure that my intent is heard, that not get lost, is that there may be applications that we already have as part of this process that, because they were doing this and were deemed to be riskier because of the land acquisition process, might not have been considered. I don't want my thought to be interpreted as I think we should rule out, all those other applications that have been vetted. In this case, it would be perhaps a slight altering of the rubric, but I just want to make sure that those don't get thrown out as part of what we're doing.
Yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am. I hear that, and I think that from this particular item, the way you're describing it, if there's a motion that allows for the exchange so that general fund dollars become the dollars that are used, and you talk about in your motion the myriad of ways that you may, options you might want to consider, I think once that's done, then you come back, because now you're using general fund dollars. And if you want to use those dollars that you've replaced to address those applications, then that would be the understanding, but that would be the pot of money that you would do it from. So it'll still be the $4 million. It's just now that you've swapped out, when you're using general fund dollars. So whether you're building something using these applications or anything else, the understanding is that you're now deciding on that same pot of $4 million, regardless of how you're going to use it. So that's my understanding, Ms. Newton, of what you're saying as well. I just wanted to make sure that, again, there's no new dollars coming in. That's the same $4 million.
I think we're all on the same page with that, and I do lift up the same sentiments. I think that in this motion, we need to be very clear about what our options are, and if that is to explore housing trust, or it is to fund affordable housing by using or giving priority to those applications that we already have on file, I think that's where we need to start. And so I would like to note that once the motion comes out, that the motion includes the details that we want, because this is one. I'm just going to say it. We were being vague in trying to do big picture during this process has now kind of come back to us. So I don't want this to come back to us again. Let's be very specific in what it is that we're asking in our motion. so that we accomplish the goal this time. So at this time, if there isn't any other discussion, I will entertain a motion.
Madam Chair,
You're recognized, Mr. Branham.
if I could just seek a little bit of clarification or confirmation here on the Greenville Housing Fund's application. It appears that when the application was submitted, the housing fund did not yet own this 200-unit affordable housing complex. And the application was submitted with the contemplation that they would acquire it and then replace the roof, I believe it was. So that sounds like it would be new affordable housing units. Can anyone confirm that?
Recognize Ms. Thomas.
Thank you, sir. No, these units already exist.
I know they exist, but does the Greenville Housing Fund own them right now?
I don't know that. That was the contemplation.
And they already exist as affordable housing units?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion? Ms. Horacio?
Thank you. And what I would hope that in this motion, which hopefully is successful, that would not necessarily preclude this body from allocating funds in a way that would make those improvements and make those living conditions better for the people who do live in those affordable units. It's just that we are kind of reopening the door, perhaps, if you will. So in the discussion around, providing a mechanism that will allow our $4 million to create affordable housing in Richland County, we would still be able to look at what's available to us to move forward, to take action and create either, new units and also safe and dignified units. Maybe that's a way to put that.
I want to be clear, Ms. Horacio, of what you were stating. You support additional houses as well as repairs.
Yes, my understanding of, when we're using monies to in that space, when we're talking about affordable housing, it is not just we're creating brand new units, but rather making units that are actually livable. Because while there might be units out there, we've heard story after story about mold and damage and all the rest of it. So I don't necessarily want to cut that opportunity out, nor would I like to cut out the option of working with some of the folks that we've seen before us, perhaps just not in this particular exact way. Am I making myself a little more clear?
You are.
Okay.
You are, but I do think that it was the intent of this category was additional houses. And that's where the challenges come in with this existing list. But if that is something that this body wants to include in our motion, then most definitely.
Okay, thank you for that.
Mr. Livingston.
I'm just concerned that we focus too much on repairing units. We'll end up not getting any new units. I'm just concerned not enough of those. Maybe we can kind of split it somehow and say new units and vacated units. So that way we'll know it's an available unit that's not being used.
I like that terminology, Mr. Livingston. I do. Any further discussion? Ms. Newton.
Well, I guess for me, it would depend. And I certainly don't want to get into the weeds about what the definition of new is. But for me, again, my goal is new units. It's not repairing existing units. It's not alleviating existing units, though that certainly should happen. And I advocate for stronger regulation so that that can happen through the appropriate channels. But I think that the intent that we all walked away from, and maybe we need like psychic connections in the future so we can all be 100% sure we're new units. And so for me, that is what I am advocating for. And I would do a motion if I knew how to get all the words right, but I don't. But Mr. Brown might be able to help.
So,
Yes, Mr. Brown.
so Ms. Barron, if you allow ACA Thomas, we're going to give you the first part of the motion. It's going to be direct but generic. And if you want to add to that, so for example, with a focus on new units or however else you might want to morph that, the language we're going to provide to you will allow us to be compliant with the American Rescue Plan Act dollars use and also address what you're asking potentially do to utilize dollars in a way that addresses the specific need under affordable housing. So just take a moment and I'll ask ACA Thomas to, I know you'll speak clearly, but speak slowly so folks can have time to write it down if they need to, and then kind of formulate what they might want to say or add to it.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You recognize.
I think clearly the intent here for council is to invest $4 million in affordable housing. I would perhaps the motion could be direct the administrator to propose a plan to invest $4 million in affordable housing. Then you could add on your, in new units or whatever you like to at that point. And then we could actually bring forward a plan showing the funding mechanisms from that perspective.
You would also need to include some language that I wrote down that the administrator gave us before, and that is, and I think it's going to be important, from the general fund,
I think if we
dollar for dollar.
I believe that if we are general, we will come back to you with a recommendation.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So we don't need that. Okay. Got it.
Thank you.
And we're back for a motion. I'll try one.
I mean,
You ready? Go ahead.
No, I need 30 seconds. So if you're ready, go. Otherwise, I need 30 seconds.
Okay. And then you can just tweak mine. How about it?
Go for it.
So we're going to go with direct the administrator to propose a plan to invest $4 million into affordable housing, adding new units and or vacated units. Something's not right there, but that's my.
What's a vacated unit?
I mentioned that. Throughout our county, we have a whole lot of abandoned, for example, apartment units and so forth, where no one renovated.
Can't hear you, sir.
That could be available for individuals who do not have a home.
So if it's not being used by anyone, and then it becomes an affordable housing unit, then it would be a new affordable housing unit without the need to specify that it was vacated. Right? Because
Could say new
I'm not trying to be pedantic, but it just seems like you're talking about things that aren't in use. And so, but they would have to be specifically put into the market to be affordable housing, which would make it a new unit. And so that seems to be covered by the.
If we can call that a new unit, yes. But some folks may not say that's a new unit. That's my own point.
Ms. Horatio?
I think what we're saying is we're just not limiting the new units to new construction.
Correct.
Okay.
So let's try it again because it didn't get a second.
Two are reconstructed units.
Didn't get a second. This is wow. Okay. Direct the administrator to propose a plan to invest $4 million in affordable housing for new or reconstructed. What's reconstructed? What is that? I'm lost there.
Ms. Barron,
Oh,
so would you like to maybe allow to hear Ms. Newton's motion, and then maybe between you, we can figure out the wording that we're all trying to say with that. If I don't know how that, I mean, I know you said you didn't get a second, so I don't want to step on anybody's toes.
Ms. Newton, you want to share?
Sure, I stopped working once you did, but okay. Move.
I figured as much.
I move. I'm clear on those first two words. Move to direct the administrator to propose a plan to invest $4 million in affordable housing, specifically to add new affordable housing units to the market.
Second.
Discussion. Grillo?
Brenham,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes?
Newton.
Yes.
Motion approved.
All right. Whew. And another one. The next one we're going to is youth services, youth and recreation services. And that's on page 364. And I will do my best to tee this one up. I had a lot of notes on this section. There are maybe one or two that is a stretch for me as it relates to whether or not they are in the right category for youth and recreation services. I know I'm not going to speak on this, the intent of this category. I'm going to let Ms. Newton take that because this was one of her items that she championed. And just to also bring to our attention in this category has a lot of personnel that's included in it. And it does concern me whether or not these the personnel who are listed in these groups are going to be 100% for these projects, or are we now funding additional personnel who are doing other tasks? And I did speak to ACA Thomas just a moment ago before the meeting started. And of course, that is something that they'll have to dig down in as a part of the desk review. But the salaries do concern me. As I mentioned during our work session, when we have salaries that are being fully supported by grants, the intent of all of this money, the $16 million, was not to create new positions that now go away when the money goes away. That negatively impacts our communities. And I don't want us to really get down. I just want us to be careful with that. And I'll just leave it there. It's open for discussion.
I'm ready when you are.
Go ahead, Ms.
Thank you. Similar to affordable housing, where the proposals that were ranked most highly didn't necessarily correspond to my vision for the service, for what we were doing, youth and recreation services falls here. And so I advocated and got the funds increased. Originally, we proposed $500,000, getting that increased to $1 million because the youth in our community need so much right now. I mean, it is a hard time to be a teen, and I feel so blessed to be a Gen Xer who didn't have some of these challenges that they had that I don't know what to say. And so the intent when I was advocating for it is that what we were going to do was provide services and recreational opportunities and just general opportunities directly to young people to help them, get off the streets, to help them find things to do, to help them do whatever, but that it was really going to benefit youth. There are some proposals in here where I feel like the closest that they get to youth is that these people were young at some point. And that's not what we're trying to do here. And so for me, and I am troubled to say this because this has been such a painstaking process, but I really don't feel good about allocating the funds here. And I guess for right now, while I figure out, what the other option is, I guess I almost want to, table it to the next meeting or whatever and come back. But for me, this does not fill the intent of what I was recommending at all. Now, that said, I would be interested in discussing and willing to discuss the proposal from the Midlands Mediation Center, because that proposal is about training an army of volunteers. So we're not looking at forever salaries, but an army of volunteers who can go out into the community, and teach people conflict resolution skills, et cetera. And I've had a personal experience of helping to support narrative mediation training for youth in a community. And I was able to see how, even in the 3 sessions that they did, how they were interacting with people differently, and longstanding conflicts that some of these people had with each other were resolved on the spot. And so even though this isn't what I had in mind, I would love to have a discussion about this proposal, because our people do need to know how to handle conflict better. But as it relates to the other grant proposals, I am not in a position to support them, because I don't feel like it does the intent of what I advocated for. And thank you for listening to my TED Talk.
Thank you, Ms. Newton. Any other discussion on youth and recreation services? Got anything, Mr. Branham? You want to share? Any of the other council members?
I would, Madam Chair.
You recognize, sir.
I look at that, the ABLE SC application, and, the spirit of it, I think is wonderful and spot on. But at the same time, just relating back to some of the comments that have already been made, and that so much of the funds are proposed to go towards salaries for new positions. And just something that I certainly note. And so along with that, I can very much relate to concerns expressed by.
Thank you.
Can I say just one more thing, and that'll be.
You recognize Ms. Newton.
Thank you. And again, like with the other categories, I do want to acknowledge that these are excellent organizations, and my comments are in no way to imply that the work that they are proposing isn't good and noble work, nor that they are not good and noble organizations. It just doesn't meet the intent or the spirit with which I was advocating for funding. So again, great organizations. They're all doing yeoman's work.
So I'll insert here. Now I'm just going to kind of go through the list here. Like the Big Red Barn, I'm a big fan of. They are located in District 7, and the work they're doing for first responders and veterans is amazing. But my concern is that this category is for youth and recreation. And I don't think that this particular application is in the proper location. I don't know if that's something that we can fix, but it definitely does not belong in this category. And then when I look, there's another one that I would like to bring up, and that's the one with the healthy learners. Wanted to also bring that up. I could support that one as well. It does have heavy salaries. And when we start looking at funding organizations, and I'll be redundant because it's worth repeating, we want to make sure. I see 50. They asked for $100,000, and 50,000 is direct service salary fringe, salaries and fringe, and then medical fees. I'm not certain what that is, even when looking in the even in looking at the narrative, you asked for 100,000, half of it is going to your salaries. I can support this. I just can't support it at this as how they've submitted in these categories. Those are only ones that I can, really speak to when I look at support. And I would, to be very clear, I think that I would like for us to entertain if there is, or if we can move an organization, if they're not in the proper location, can they be relocated to another area that's most appropriate? If that is a question that I do have. And the other statement that I'd like to make is that I could support Able SC, I can support Healthy Learners, and I can support Midlands Mediation Center. Mr. Livingston, did you have anything you want to share?
I was so far off base, I was ashamed to share it. But I just wonder whether we could use these funds for things like a pretty comprehensive summer jobs program or internships, things of that nature, where I know young folks going to definitely benefit.
Well, yeah, I think that's kind of where the intent was, when we're looking at, when I remember the conversation we had, we were talking about parks, we were talking about, activities, things for the youth to be able to do. When we originally stated, we're planning for this category, and right now it looks like we have maybe a couple that's a stretch. And I think that what this body has to determine is, once we make allocations, if there are, if there's money left over, what do we do with that money that's left over in that category? So that's something that we can also look at and explore. It may be that, it may be that certain categories we have another look at the applications that are already with us. It could be that we have a blanket motion that says all money that's left over goes to a particular place. But that's something that this body will have to explore. I don't want us to take that up and get derailed right now with that. But I do think that once we get some allocated, then we can come back and look and see what's left over, because once the desktop review takes place, we may say today, oh, it looks like we're going to have, $300,000 left over. But when the desktop review takes place, we may end up with $600,000 left over. So, Mr. Brown, you look like you wanted to say something.
You just had a question, and I wanted to say that in some instances, applicants did not put down a particular category. So if there was somebody that you wanted to look at funding and that you wanted to go to the desk review process, I believe that certainly you could do that. The other thing could have been a lot of folks may have applied under nonprofit, and there may have been a review that the third party said, this is an eligible use, and it looks like a high good one. And so they tried to find a next best place for it to go, so that it would not get lost as a very qualifying use as compared to risk. So that possibly could have happened with a program like the Healthy Learners, for example. So part of it is maybe not a direct ask for a category by the provider that's being requesting funding. And if the applicants if everybody stuck themselves in one group, and then so in essence, if all these folks get knocked out, then you don't get to see anybody. That could potentially be another area. So to address your concern about whether or not you might want to fund somebody that you feel should be in another group, that is the purview of this committee to determine where you want the funding to come from. So
I have a lot of questions about that. So that statement concerns me a lot. And so whether it's now or via email later, I would like clarity on if the categories that we are looking at represent categories that were selected by applicants or categories that we selected or that were selected by some third party. And the reason is because we are here evaluating specific buckets. So to say we're going to move funding from this bucket to the other bucket may then mean that a bucket where there is enough funding for everybody now becomes a bucket where there's not enough funding, or could potentially, we haven't approved enough for this to be a factor yet, could potentially alter previous recommendations that we already made. And so I guess I was operating under an assumption that people put themselves in this category. And if they put themselves in that category, then it's one thing to say, nope, you don't, we asked for apples and you're a kumquat, we're going to put you to the side. So I would like that answer.
So Ms. Newton, I can actually give you some of that right now. If you
Okay.
recall, you may not recall because it's been a long time.
It's been a long
We
time.
did talk about early on that one of the reasons why it took so long for some of these reviews is because everybody did not put themselves into a bucket.
Okay.
So we talked about that's what thing extended this out because some instances we did not get a lot of good information, and in some instances people did not select a category. So that was part of the discussion that we did have. So I'm not saying that everybody here that you're looking at did not select a category, but there were a number of applicants who did not select a category.
Okay. So then I will chew on this, but my fundamental question would remain, at least with the organizations that have been put forward, to understand if they put themselves in this category or if they put themselves in a different category. Because for me, that affects how I move forward. And I apologize and I'm not trying to slow us down today, and I apologize if that adds a wrinkle, but for me, that information is important in terms of how we allocate. So that's one thing. So, but is that request clear, or do I need to say it another way?
It's clear.
Okay, so that's one thing. So secondly, what I would say to the point of funding and how we deal with funding, I came prepared to make a motion for what to do with funds, with categories where we don't expend all the funds. And at the appropriate time, I will make that motion. But my goal would be that unless otherwise specified, that we leave, well, I've got a recommendation that may or may not be supported with a plan for what to do with those funds. And so I'll go on record and say, I think affordable housing for me is one of those categories where we're putting it aside in a different bucket. For me, the youth and recreation services, because of how wide we are off the mark, is a category that I would like to say, let's, put that aside. But then for all the other categories, well, I'll just say it, I'll make the motion at the time. I would like to take any unallocated funds, and I would like to see us apply those to the DSS, the new DSS center that we're building, but I will wait until the appropriate time comes. So then I'm so sorry, Ms. Barron, and I return control to you.
Thank you, Ms. New. So any further discussion on youth services? So at this time, I would entertain a motion for this group, the Youth and Recreation Services.
I move that we forward a recommendation to fund the Midlands Mediation Center to full council. And we reserve, and I'll let you fix this word later, the remaining funds in youth services to be allocated at a later date as consistent with the federal ARPA guidelines.
There a second? I'm sorry, I was steady writing. Second? Okay, if not, if dies for lack of a second, I'll entertain a motion.
I just offer some discussion.
And
But
Okay.
there has to be a second. You can second it for discussion.
We don't have we didn't have a second, so at this point,
That's true.
we can move forward with the discussion.
I was really happy to hear about what Ms. Newton shared about the Midlands Mediation Center. I certainly see violence prevention and crime reduction, community relations, specifically targeting young people as something that is a valid, potentially in my understanding of, what youth services would mean. But again, just similar to the point earlier related to the fact that so much of the funding just relates to salary funding in the application and people's time. And I understand that people's time is kind of the essence of what I would understand the project to be. But at the same time, otherwise, outside of people's time, I basically understood there to be a small amount that would go towards rental spaces for listening sessions and I think maybe mediation sessions was the name of the meetings, how they were labeled. So I'd like to support it, but I'm not sure about supporting it at that level just at that level. I'd love to hear Ms. Newton or the chairwoman's thoughts on that.
So I just want to remind us that, whereas these items are presented to us in, at $100,000, for instance, there's still the desk review that's going to take place. And just based on my expertise in grants and my knowledge, a lot of them are not going to receive full funding. They're not. I mean, I have taken a very deep dive and looked at these budgets based upon my limited knowledge of the federal guidance, and I don't know of one that's going to get 100% funding. If I was a betting woman, and some days I am, I would put it on the line. Ms. Newton?
Thank you. I'm not a betting woman, but I'm a trusting woman, and I trust you, Ms. Barron. So, and you're right, and Mr. Branham in terms of some of those costs, and I went back and looked through that, and I guess for me, one of the things that I was wondering is if you're training volunteers to go forth and do work, somebody has to train them. So I was maybe looking at it that way, but I guess I have a question for staff. The way that we've been approaching this so far is we're trying to make a motion for something to be approved and send it to council. And I know we've talked about the desk review, but is there an opportunity, since we have more questions about a particular application, to say, hey, this isn't a desk review. You're not looking through all the financials, but can someone have a conversation with this applicant and get more information? Is that an action that is appropriate for where we are that we might be able to do in this case?
I would think to the extent that you're considering that application for possible funding, getting clarity from them that only they can provide would be reasonable. I don't know if, so I would I would say yes. You're trying to make sure you understand what you're getting for the funding request, separate and apart from an eligibility review of the actual expenditures. So I think those are two slightly different things.
So I'm sorry to interrupt. I know we did this before, but for this case, since at least for me, I'm only looking at one applicant for this whole category, would it perhaps be most appropriate if we maybe, kind of tabled this for now, but perhaps gave more directed questions to administration so you could ask those specifically? So you're not just having some random conversation. It's here are 5-pointed conversations that were asked by council members. And I'm open to suggestion. I feel like we need some more information on this category.
So, Ms. Newton, as you were speaking, I did think to that perhaps what we could do is like we've already done so far, we voted on organizations to be funded. What we could do is direct staff, instead of bringing this list out of committee and going to full council as a recommendation, asking administration and staff to ask whatever questions we have of those that we are recommending for funding and bring it back to this group. Then we send out for full council's blessing. Could that work?
It certainly could. I guess from where I am right now in this process, I don't know if I have enough questions about other groups to slow down the forwarding to full council, I guess. So I guess I would leave that up to the other members of the body. And again, for me, even if we wanted to just, for lack of a better term, table this category for now, I'm okay with that too.
Is that a motion?
I don't know that we would, if we're just going to keep it in committee, I don't know that we would need a motion. We could just move on to the next category, right?
Right.
Yes, you could, especially since there was a motion made that was never seconded. So you could either make another motion or move to another category.
I just, I guess I asked for a motion because I want to make sure that is the consensus of the committee, that's what we want to do.
Gotcha.
Mr. Branham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm content with that. If we table it, I think we've had a meaningful conversation. I think potentially we've shared some prevailing concerns that maybe do have some commonality across applications. And with a little time, we might be able to provide some additional guidance or set a policy, at least as to this committee, that perhaps relates to, salaries and the amount of funding in the application towards the salaries. And maybe that's something we could pick up in earnest next meeting, if not further resolved today. And I do apologize. I've got to step away from the meeting today for a commitment.
Thank you, Mr. Branham. And so I want to be clear, if we are going to move forward, that we are specific as to what we're asking our staff to do. So when we come back to this topic, that they can provide us with the information that we need so that we'll be able to address it. So outside of salaries, what else are we needing from staff, or what would we like for them? What information would we like for them to gather?
Are you asking your question broadly, Ms. Barron, across every category or across this category?
Right now, I'm just specifically talking about youth and recreation services, because this is the only one that so far we've tabled.
So I guess what I would more think of is that we direct ourselves and that we separately, by the end of this week, send the specific questions to staff, if that's okay. Because I don't want to miss any questions for not, for coming up with it on the spot for this one.
And that is respected. I just wanted to make sure that we maximize our opportunities while we had them here. So I didn't know if there were any additional questions that we had. And if we don't, then we can move to the next category.
And we'll be able to continue meeting because we're still a quorum at 2. Okay.
Correct.
Correct.
So our next category that we're going to is senior assistants. And I apologize, I didn't get that page number. It's on page 174. We have 2 applicants here. I actually do not have a whole lot of, I really don't have any commentary for this one, besides the fact that it's slightly over our amount. And I don't know how we get it where it needs to go, but I'm open for discussion, and the floor is open for discussion at this point. Ms. Newton.
It defaults to me, I guess, if no one else is here. So for me, I feel like I need to take a slightly different look than I looked before in terms of looking at how some of these expenditures shake out as we look at some of the concerns that we have about staffing, et cetera. But they seemed like worthy projects. I was inclined to look at perhaps, splitting the funding if we thought they were both applicable. I will say that I did have a question that maybe in all this fine print that I missed as it relates to the SC uplift, just wanting to understand what their approach to geographic diversity is. And obviously, you don't get to pick the people who apply to your programs, the people that ask for help or the people that ask for help. But this is just an area where I think there are people all across the county that need assistance. I think that some people are harder to reach than others. And to invest this level of funding, I would just like to understand how they're going to approach hitting people in all parts of the county. I have that question about every project that we fund, but for some reason I wrote that down specifically there. But I would apply that question to everybody.
So I am going to not give any input on this category specifically, as I will need to recuse myself from this category because I do work with the South Carolina Community Action Partnership. So I will do the necessary paperwork, but I will not be included into this conversation. Ms. Thomas?
Yes.
So that was my next statement. That was my next statement. When I looked down, I didn't realize that this was the organization. I was so caught up in the aging. So with that, let's move on from this discussion here, and then we'll pick up at our next meeting for the senior assistants. And the next group that we'll go to will be for.
Could we do, if you're taking requests, maybe unhoused? Was that on your list for today?
We're gonna have to, that we don't have a quorum for that one either.
Gotcha, okay.
Yeah, so I'm looking at workforce training grants. This one was a little more difficult for me.
Yeah, that was for me as well. Could we do nonprofits?
Profits.
I'm trying to, when I'm looking at the amount of discussion we're gonna have, I'm asking if we could do that in the spirit of maximizing how many things we get out of the committee, knowing how many questions I'm going to ask.
You're so kind. So yeah, let's go to nonprofits. You have a page number? That one wasn't.
It's the very first one.
The very
you
first
can start at 13.
Okay, here we go. I'm ready.
Okay, I'm getting there too.
So I'll start. And I think we did have this discussion. We know that there are 3 that have already received funding through the ARPA funds, and that's Community Relations Council, the Lurie Center, and PALS. They've already received their funding. So we are specifically looking at premium pay for Cooperative Ministries, the Columbia City Ballet, Epworth Children's Home, Midlands Remediation Center. Those are the ones that we are specifically looking at for this process. And I will say that there were, several or a couple of the applicants listed here where it was very heavy in salaries. I think that it is not the intent of this body to pay 100% of your salaries for your employees. And I would not support 100% of anyone's salaries being paid out of these funds. It was designed, that doesn't meet what our objective was. And so that's my biggest concern with this category. There was 1 or maybe 2 applicants that, 90% of the funds that they asked for were for their salaries. And that's something that I've been consistent with in our conversation throughout the day. Ms. Newton.
If I may ask a question and not trying to put you on the spot. So for example, one of the areas that I was just curious about as I looked at these applications is one of them is specifically for pandemic premium pay. So 100% of it is salary. So using the guidelines that you're using, is that one that you would look less favorably upon for this category?
No, I think that that's totally different.
Okay.
It is different because this body is already set for our staff throughout the county premium pay. So when I speak of salaries, 100% of salaries, I'm talking about if a person makes $50,000 and we're paying that whole $50,000 and it has nothing to do COVID related. That's what I'm speaking of.
Okay, and I just wanted to inquire about that because of that category. So, and again, this is a category where we just said, you're a nonprofit. Would you like help that meets the ARPA guidelines? And you may not have this information handy, and if not, that's totally fine. Do you happen to know, or is it somewhere in this voluminous binder, how many organizations applied for this category? So many that an alarm went off. Okay, thank you. Are you waiting for me to say something else, Ms. Barron?
I was getting ready to tell you while she's getting that number. Oh, you have to get it at a later date. You picked up your phone, so I thought, oh, she's just Johnny on the spot.
Usually she is, but we make exceptions on Wednesday.
Okay, we'll give her a pass today. So Ms. Newton, is there anything else that or any other questions that you have?
Let me look at my list here. So
and definitely to our other colleagues that are present, please feel free to add into the conversation.
So again, great organizations doing great work. I think that I'm looking at my list here. Because I know we've talked a lot about salary. I know that we here at the county have paid pandemic premium pay. So I think that I feel comfortable with the good work that the cooperative ministry's been doing. Bless the people at Worth for all of the things that they are doing there. I think I can support parts of the Midlands Mediation Center, and that area may be an area where I have some additional questions. And then for me, just as a personal matter, I would be curious to get additional information in terms of some of the assertions that were made in the application in terms of, this service equates to this amount of savings. And I understand that we're all estimating, but I would be curious to be able to measure that a little more closely. I will confess that I did struggle with the ballet application and I'll put a period there. I did struggle.
Mr. Horacio or Mr. Livingston, do you all have anything to add to this category?
I would think about the application and that would.
I'm having trouble hearing you, and I'm close to you.
Hear me now?
No, not really.
It's on, I think.
There you go.
Can you hear me?
I'm closer.
Can you hear me now?
Absolutely. Sounds great.
Well, I remember looking at the application. I think I was concerned about the amount of funds for marketing, and for that short period of time. I mean, it was like over $150,000, if I remember correctly. So that was my biggest concern for that one, was the amount.
Are you done, Mr. Emerson?
Let me make sure that's. Yeah, that was the one. Yeah, just advertising and marketing promotion, billboards are 65,000, advertising marketing related salary was 75,000. So I just thought that was extremely expensive for marketing for a short period of time in that particular budget. And then the 77,000 for payroll as well. I support that, but just think that's an awful lot. As far as the simulation center, was really okay with that one. That's all I kind of had on those few in that category.
Thank you, Mr. Livingston. I would just, like to note that I had some challenges with the ballet and the amount of funding that they were requesting specific to marketing as well as their staff. And, again, being very consistent with it, I just think that when we look at these funds, we have to make sure that we're being good stewards over the funds, and to say there's been and I know the ballet was negatively impacted by COVID. I'm not denying that. But what I am saying is that I'm not certain if it is 100% of our responsibility and duty as a county to supplement or even fulfill the salary request at 100% for the ballet. I just don't think I could support that. The other ones I do support. It's a stretch for me with Epworth's Children's Home. I understand when the pandemic was going on and all the children were doing e-learning, then of course there were security challenges, which I guess if I further as I'm talking it out loud, like there are several schools in Richland one now doing e-learning because of building challenges. So is that something that was brought to the light as a result of the pandemic? Then I guess I would have to say yes. Given that, I could support even the Epworth Children's Home and definitely pandemic premium pay as I started. We've done it already with the county. So at this time, if there's no more discussion, I will entertain a motion.
Well, I guess again, not trying to put you on the spot, but it's just us here and everybody who may watch on the internet later. Just kind of going through this, you didn't mention the mediation center. Did you have particular either thoughts or concerns in terms of that proposal that you wanted to raise? Oh,
no, I am in support. I am in support.
Okay, just
yes.
you didn't
yes,
mention it.
I did not mean, and I apologize.
Okay, and so then, so I guess for me, there was so much in the ballet's application. And there were so many places where I had questions or I felt concerned. I didn't feel like I was able to back out a number, like, even for partial funding. So I guess I just want to give an opportunity if there was somebody who did have an affirmative recommendation that they wanted to make, that I would hear it. But otherwise, I don't know how to untangle those threads in terms of what they asked for. So I wouldn't know how to put together a motion that included them.
If I may, I think that we could possibly offer the same olive branch for the Columbia City Ballet as we did earlier, and afford them to be a part of the motion with the conditions of looking at getting or not being, I take that back. I would not include them in a motion for funding, but I would think that it would be appropriate to have a separate motion to direct staff to be able to have previous conversations with them prior to us making that, making a recommendation to full council.
So to make sure that I'm tracking, so what we were doing with the other category is that we were kind of directing ourselves to send those direct and pointed questions to staff while keeping the item in committee. So are you suggesting here that we also keep this item in committee and then send along our questions, or were you advocating that we go along both paths, which is to send recommendations to council and then separately send additional questions that we have?
The latter. Yes.
In that case, I move to recommend for funding to council. Hold on, let me make sure my math is going to be okay. I have so many spreadsheets here with so much stuff. Hold on. Ms. Thomas, if I did a motion for, nope, I'm okay. Sorry, I took out the big one. I move that we forward a recommendation to full council to fund the cooperative ministry, Epworth's Children's Home, and the Midlands Mediation Center, and that any questions that the committee has regarding the Columbia City Ballet be sent to staff for them to get answers.
Second. Further discussion. Ms. Carrillo?
Brenham, Barron,
Yes?
Newton.
Yes.
Motion approved.
All right. So next one that we can go to, Ms. Newton, if you don't have a recommendation, I was going to look at food insecurities.
That's good.
Page 188.
Get there in a second. Trying to make notes on what I'm doing here so that I won't be so confused when I come back next time. And Ms. Barron, after this, I do have a few general questions about our process that I would love to ask at the appropriate time. I just mention it now because I know we're getting close to the end.
So I just want to make sure that we mention that senior resources has already been funded to the tune of $548,046. And so if my math is correct, when you back that out, that leaves us 1.4 million. So that'll leave us $1.4 million for us to address food insecurities here. Ms. Newton, do you have some burning comments or questions?
I just have a lot of notes and I need a little patience while I shuffle through my paper here.
No problem. No problem.
But I'm willing to hear any of your burning comments.
Sure.
Mary.
So this particular category for me was one of those that it appeared that there could possibly be supplanting. And it looked like perhaps that we were not the funds were not being used for new project, are not being used to expand the project, but really replacing existing funds. And that concerns me gravely because that really lends, if we fund these organizations and that is the case, then it puts us at a great liability and exposure to the county. And that is really, when I look at all of them, it does concern me. I did have a question about Greg's Groceries. And I wrote down, is the applicant is Serve and Connect?
Okay, yes.
Okay. Because I got stuck on the grocery store portion and I'm like, this is a for-profit entity. Yeah. And then let's see. Looking through.
May I ask a question while you look, Ms. Barron? So on page 222, I can get there. We have an application from Senior Resources, and I just want to confirm that this application is in addition to all the other funds that we've provided, or are we subtracting? How does this relate to funding that we have already provided?
This particular request is an ask, an additional ask.
Okay. Gotcha.
So, Mr. Brown, when you say an additional ask.
Sorry. So there was a request. So in your packet on page. Right, but it's still an additional. It's an additional request. Yeah. Oh, okay, yeah. I'm sorry. She was communicating that the application tells you what they're going to use it for. But when I say an additional request, if you look on your page that you were looking at for food insecurity grants, you will notice that it said 548,046 cents was already approved, okay, because those funds were already included in this category. That was a motion that came out of the previous budget process. This particular request for the 822 is not included anywhere. It is a request for funding that has currently not been approved by any part of county government at this time.
So they would be asking for the $500,000 plus the $800,000.
The 548 would already have been received as a part of the approved.
Correct.
So technically, I want to make it seem like they're asking again.
Well, I'll say it. Sorry. Okay. Yes, I should say that differently. They're coming with a request for an additional for $800,000 separate and apart from that previous allocation.
That is correct.
Gotcha. Okay.
So to that point, it's an additional ask for the same program. I think this is critically important to make sure that we're clear.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes, ma'am.
The funds that were allocated during the budget process in June of last year were for the calendar year or for the fiscal year, July 1, 22 to June 30, 23. So yes, this is the same program. If you look in the application, they're asking to fund July 1, 2023 through December 31st, 2024.
May I inquire again, Ms. Barron?
May.
Have they, separate from ARPA funds, do you have information about any other applications that they have made or are planning to make as we enter the new budget cycle for the county?
I can't recall if we've received a request from them yet relative to a request. Additionally, if they were to apply for community impact funding, that application process hasn't begun yet.
Okay, so you can't speak for them, but understanding the grants and funding that the county offers, the community impact grants would be the most appropriate vehicle that they might also use to apply for additional funding.
That would be my understanding.
Okay, and then I was not able to attend the meeting, but at the last community impact grants meeting, my understanding is that there is a motion that was made that there would be some organizations that wouldn't necessarily, I don't want to put words in their mouths, that would be granted line item status, correct me where I'm wrong, in the budget. Is that a correct representation of what happened at that meeting?
Let me address that.
Thank you.
So the wording that was used was basically that they would not have to go through a competitive proceeding in order to receive funds that the county would allocate. So
Okay.
that's the wording that was used.
Okay, yeah, I was going to say that first, and then I was like, I wasn't sure if that was correct. Okay, and so my understanding is that there were 9 to 10 organizations that were put into that category of not having to go through a competitive grant funding process, and that Senior Resources was one of those organizations. Is that correct?
The clerk's office is saying that's correct. I was going to pull up my agenda from yesterday, but
That's correct.
Okay. So while we go through this category, which maybe is not quite as easy as I thought it was going to be, I would note 2 things. One is that as we look at the requests that were made for this category, we have received more requests than we can fund. So there, if we wanted to fund everybody at the maximum level, at the full level that they asked for, there would be an additional $487,000 that we need to find. So some sort of cutting has to happen somewhere. So I put that out there for consideration. The other thing that I would put out for consideration is, as we look at concerns about, so I have concerns about if you're coming to this bucket for almost $1 million, and then there's this other bucket, again, they do great work. Many organizations do great work, and I'm sure would love to get, this level of funding for the county. But this does concern me, particularly in light of the fact that this is a budget item where there's not enough categories. So I'll put that there. And then, Ms. Barron, finally, and I'll be quiet, I'll just echo your concerns about, where we might be supplanting as opposed to being additive, because that wasn't the intent. We were trying to, expand the reach. And there is a nonprofit that, I worked with a group of nonprofits that received funding from a grant organization, and I'll just call them Acme because I don't need to name them. But the motto that organization used was "but for Acme." So when they funded people, it wasn't, they're like, you could be doing these things and you're supposed to do them because that's your job and that's your mission. When we fund you, we want to fund you because but for Acme, you could never have reached this additional height. You couldn't have done this additional additive thing or this innovation or whatever. And so I guess as it relates here, that's what I would like to see, that, we're doing this work, and but for Richland County, we couldn't have done this great new thing. Not that we were already doing this thing and now Richland County is going to pay for us to do the thing that we're already doing.
Just respond to one thing, as you mentioned. Now, the community impact agencies that's been recommended, remember, there's no direct funding for them. They may or may not get funded. How much they're going to get funded, we'll never know until that issue is taken up later on.
Noted.
Thank you, Mr. Livingston, because I was going to add to that with the community impact grants. What we stated in the committee was that for lack of better terms, these are friends of Richland County. I'll just use it like that. So these are friends of Richland County, and as they are friends of Richland County, they are now in this group that does not have to meet the competitive process at any time when we are doing our budget cycle. Budget cycle will determine okay, if the Friends of Richland County will get $2 or if they get $5. That we don't know what that amount will be until it's determined either. And I wasn't in the last meeting, but I was listening in, and if I had it correctly, it could be that the committee could make recommendation or the budget during the budget cycle. Then specific council members can make those motions as we've done in the past. So what I would, given the hour, what I would like to do is just put a pin right here in our discussion, because we don't have enough time to really complete this particular category. I also would like to say to the committee and those that are present, if you have any questions for any of these categories, to let's within the next week, so exactly 1 week, so by next Wednesday, if you could please have any of the questions that may have come up today, or that as you're reviewing your packet, to submit those to Mr. Brown. Should we submit them to ACA Thomas again?
Yes, ma'am.
To submit those to ACA Thomas, and if we'll have the clerk's office to also include all council members on an email to ask them to submit any additional questions that they may have. And I think that's what's important about the questions that we're asking at this point are specific to organizations. So if you have a question, one of those questions about senior resources, ask your question specific to senior resources, because what we're asking ACA Thomas to do during this time is to contact them and say, hey, we have this question about your application. These should be specific questions about the application. I do want to allow for time. Ms. Newton, you said you had a couple of questions about our process.
I do. And so one question that I have is, at our last meeting, or at our work session, well, let me skip it. I don't need to go back in the past. My question is it possible and appropriate for the organizations that we recommend be forwarded to council for recommendation, that we ask those organizations to submit a short abstract that summarizes their project? Here's why I ask. Some of the organizations in here did a better job than others explaining their project and just having, a better summary. And I know that all council members have had this packet. I know that we've all reviewed it. I just think that there's room between a sentence and 15 pages. Is that something that would be appropriate? And I guess, Ms. Barron, do you think it would be helpful? It would be helpful for me. I struggled with some of these.
Well, I know that there was Ms. McBride had a similar concern, and there was one other council member, I don't remember who it was, that made a statement about the abstract. But I definitely would love to hear from you, Mr. Brown, as to if this is something that is feasible.
Thank you for acknowledging me. What I would prefer to have, if we could have Director Harris, who represents as our grants manager, just to share that with you, as she has that direct experience. And I think the answer is going to be direct.
Yes, we can certainly do that. So this is part of the pre-eligibility process. So nothing has really been set in stone just yet. So we can certainly reach out and have them develop an abstract for us.
And then if I could, I guess, expand what I said. Originally, what I said was the groups that we were forwarding to council. And I guess now what I would say is any project that is still under consideration, it's under consideration because it's been forwarded to the body. It's under consideration because we haven't had a chance to discuss it. If we could have that for everything, that would be helpful. Again, some organizations did a better job than others. And for some of the applications that I quite frankly struggled with, it's because it seemed like they were doing one thing and then it seemed like they were doing another thing. And just having that would be a great benefit for me.
We can certainly do that. It'll take just a little bit of time to collect that information, but I think that would be very helpful to the process.
And so before you leave the podium, Ms. Newton, is this an abstract that you are requesting I want to know when you would like to have this abstract. Would you like to have this abstract as a part of for those that we've already anticipate sending to full council? Would you want those to be a part of that packet, or would you want, when do you want this? Because I can see that this could be confusing. And if we send some through with abstracts and then later having some other ones come through, and honestly, this request could very well further delay the process. And I'm fine with that, but I want us to be fully aware of, any additional requests. We're talking about people involved in this process. We're talking about, let's be realistic, next week is spring break. We're thinking about all these things, these factors. And so if we're requesting that the grants team ask for this pre-eligibility document, we also need to be specific on when we want it back and, what process do we want it to be linked to? Do we want it to be linked to this process here in the committee and then going forward with our recommendations? So can you talk about a little bit more about what your intent is there?
Sure. Well, my intent is not to slow down the process. And so I am open to suggestion in terms of what the time frame is and how we do it. But in terms of the organizations that I'm including all organizations that are currently under consideration by council. So the organizations that are here in this binder, the organizations that I would be willing to exclude from that, if you think it's not too confusing, is, let's take the category broadband. For broadband, we recommended funding some and not others. So I don't think that it's worth the effort to ask those organizations where we've already said who we're going to send forward to council to ask the ones that we're not to do an abstract. Now, my colleagues may feel differently because they may have wanted to fund those organizations. So that's where I'm open to suggestion. I'm flexible. In terms of timeline, I'll rely on our grant office to suggest something that's reasonable. I don't know that there's plenty of, hold on. There seems like there might be time before our next council meeting, but then I don't know if that affects our rules. Our clerk says no. I'm willing for our staff to come back and say what's reasonable on that timeline. I'm not trying to stop the process for it. I would like for it to be expeditious, but
Brown.
I'm not answering emails on spring break. This is going to be the first time ever.
Right. So I would say we can make the request, but we're depending on the folks to respond, and what's reasonable to us may not fit their schedules depending on where their activities lie. The next council meeting, I believe, is scheduled for the 18th. And next week is not that matters to. I'm just talking in general. If next week is spring break and you have any applicants who are taking off a week, the information has to be in basically a week in advance in order to make it to the packet in a timely fashion. So all those are considerations. So we can definitely make the ask and let you know what response we receive. They may email us back the next 24, 48 hours. I don't know. So I don't have a solid answer because we're dependent on the other party to express what's realistic for them, rather than my staff reaching out and asking for the request, which we will do based off the request here. Ms. Barron and Ms. Newton, that's the best I can do.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Livingston.
Do we have a time frame for when we'll try to get this done?
We have not put forth a timeline, Mr. Livingston, but ironically enough, probably about 10 minutes ago, I just wrote myself a note and said, create a timeline. And I'll just leave right what else I said there is not important, but we need a timeline. Yes, sir.
What the problem for me with this process is it's done, to be honest with you, it has been overwhelming for me. Because when I try to go through all the categories, by the time I get halfway through, I'm confused about whether was that related to this project or that project and so forth. With hindsight, what might have been helpful if we would have just simply decided to take a couple of them at a time and we could all just focus on 2 categories, 3 categories and get it done instead of my trying to remember all of them at one time. And I get here, I'm all confused.
That was kind of the goal today, but I guess that goal could have been communicated prior to. So I definitely hear you on that. Any recommendations from you?
And actually, may I ask one question quickly? Based on where we are in our schedule, when would the recommendations that we made today be on a council agenda? Based on our process.
The motions that were approved will go to the council agenda on the 18th. The ones that are pending information will go whenever we receive them.
Okay.
So potentially could be in May.
Okay, thank you.
And that's good, because that's my question too, because we had to wait to finish everything to send to council. We really won't get it done. So yeah, good.
And we will certainly do our best to, do what we can to try to get those answers back. But I echo and share the same sentiment as Administrator Brown that we're at the mercy of other folks in this process. But we will certainly communicate with the potential candidates during this process for that.
And if I could make a recommendation, part question, that may be because there are a lot of people to reach out to, that it might be efficient to prioritize asking those organizations that we're recommending for funding at the next meeting to get that information. And then in terms of a method, there are many times when we receive supplemental documentation by email, which doesn't limit us to the time like it does to appear on our formal agenda. So if that's an appropriate way to distribute the information, and we could at least ask those people who have an opportunity to get money on the 18th, they might find time.
I would agree. So we'll do what we can, and if that's an approved process and methodology, then we can go forth with that.
I do think that when we communicate with them, especially if we start with the groups that we're recommending for funding, that we're very specific in our requests as to, you're moving on to the next process, to the next stage, but without this information, you won't be able to move forward. I think if we articulate that, then I think we will probably prayerfully have good success. So do we need a motion to do what we're doing right now, Mr. Wright?
I don't think so, because all you're doing is requesting basically the new information or specific information. So I think administration can do that.
Okay, so with that, just so that we're all since we're all on the same sheet of music, moving forward, we have a couple of groups that will request additional information as far as an abstract is concerned. And then we'll also request everyone who's in our binder to, at a later date, we'll request them to also submit an abstract. If you have questions about any applicant, specific to any applicant, that you'll turn those questions in to Ms. ACA Thomas by next Wednesday, which I believe is the 12th. And then after this meeting, I'm going to create a timeline as well that will be specific to some additional meetings, committee meetings, so that we can continue this process along the way. Is there anything further from the committee or any council members or staff that are here?
Move to adjourn.
Second. Ms. Carrillo?
Aaron?
Yes.
Newton?
Yes.
Motion approved.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.